Supreme Court's ruling means that employers like Hobby Lobby or Grody Industries in my home state of Indiana, a family-run auto lighting company in Madison, Indiana, will not be forced to take actions contrary to their religious beliefs or their moral beliefs. And so I applaud this ruling issued by the court because freedom of religion is a core American principle guaranteed by our First Amendment. And through this decision, the court has affirmed that the administration simply can't pick and choose when and how or whether to adhere to the Constitution. So while this ruling is a welcome positive step, it's important to note that religious freedom is still under attack across this country. And it's under attack because the court's ruling applies only to a very narrow group, family-owned for-profit companies such as Hobby Lobby, when many faith-based organizations, charities, hospitals, educational institutions are still required to facilitate insurance coverage that includes contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs despite their religious beliefs and despite their moral objections. So requiring these faith-based institutions and businesses to betray the fundamental tenets of their beliefs is, I believe, unconstitutional. And the administration's so-called accommodation is far from adequate in advancing this fundamental breach of our First Amendment rights in our Constitution. Those impacted by this mandate are a large and diverse group that includes Indiana-based institutions like Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana, the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, and many other schools based on a religious foundation that finds a moral and religious objection to this mandate issued by the federal government. Despite conscious objections and the University of Notre Dame's clearly outlined standards and values, Notre Dame has been told by a federal appeals court late last year that it must comply with the Obamacare mandate, which they're appealing. And it's important to also note that we're not just talking here about institutions of higher learning. My alma mater, one of those institutions, Wheaton College, was told by the Supreme Court just last week that it doesn't have to abide by the contraceptive coverage mandate until the judicial system determines whether the administration's requirement is valid for religious institutions and other nonprofits. As just an aside, it was surprising to read this morning in the Wall Street Journal that, in fact, it was disappointing and highly unusual that despite the court explicitly stating that its decision to grant Wheaton College a temporary injunction, quote, should not be construed as an expression of the court's views on the merits of Wheaton's case, having explicitly stated that, one justice wrote a dissenting opinion in which she essentially decided on the merits of the Wheaton case herself. That's the first time in my recollection. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I don't follow every decision of the Supreme Court, but I follow many of them. But surprising that justice would allow their ideological passion on a particular issue to so mischaracterize the own ruling of the court that simply provided for an injunction to give the time for the court system to make a ruling. Nevertheless, that's not why I came down here this evening. I just thought in terms of thinking through this issue and what I might say, that it appears to be some ideological bias on the court that raised its ugly head here, and hopefully that will be retracted. But whether it's Wheaton College, whether it's Notre Dame, whether it's Grace College, or numerous other institutions, it's important to understand that in many of these institutions, a ribbon of faith, a stream of water runs through everything they do in those organizations, and particularly in those schools of higher learning, and those entities that provide social services through food banks, through dealing with the homeless. The element of faith is an important to their success, it's important to their results, it's important to their beliefs. Whether it's faith and learning, as is a central part of institutions like Notre Dame or Wheaton College or others, or whether it's the homeless shelter in South Bend, Indiana, that is a combination of churches and university and city and county, and has some federal funding and some local funding and some volunteer funding. It is essential, as they've told me in one of my visits, that this ribbon of faith is essential to the success of their program and to the rehabilitation of those who walk through the front door, often homeless, and leave months and years later with capabilities of full employment, gainful employment, and become homeowners instead of homeless. And so whether it's, as I said, food banks, homeless shelters, or other important organizations, so many of these are meeting needs of people across this nation. But these institutions are seeing this ribbon of faith and the free exercise of religion constrained and restricted by this administration's mandate under the Obama health care law. And what is at stake here is of extreme significance. Established in our nation, established in the founding of our nation, and sustained for over 200 years, religious freedom is at the very core of our system of government. And protection of religious liberty means that all people of all faiths have the right to exercise their faith within the bounds of our justice system, even if their belief seems to some as misguided or flawed or flat out wrong. But what is unique about America and what is guaranteed in our Constitution is that we do not have the right to dictate to those people as to how to express their faith, as long as they are within the bounds of justice. How to express their faith, live their faith, employ their faith. And so faith-based institutions, and taking that right away is just flat out wrong and a violation of the most, I believe, most precious amendment to the Constitution. Faith-based institutions should not have to facilitate insurance coverage for products that are counter to their religious or moral beliefs. To require them to betray the fundamental tenets of their beliefs and accept this violation of their First Amendment rights guaranteed by the Constitution is simply wrong. In a joint statement released shortly after announcement of the Hobby Lobby decision, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore, chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Ad Hoc Committee for Religious Liberty, said, and I quote, "Now is the time to redouble our effort to build a culture that fully respects religious freedom." That really is what we're asking for here. We're asking this administration to respect those institutions and those individuals' religious freedom as guaranteed under our Constitution. Whether we agree with their tenets, whether we ideologically take a position in favor or not in favor, it is their right and it's guaranteed. I hope that in coming days, the Supreme Court will strike down the administration's mandate for all faith-based institutions and rescind this unprecedented attack on religious freedom. And while we await further action from the court, now is the time for this body, the United States Senate, and all Americans of faith to stand up for our country's long-standing right to the freedom of religion. It was the father of our country, after all, George Washington, who once said, and I quote, "I have often expressed my sentiments that every man conducting himself as a good citizen and being accountable to God alone for his religious opinions ought to be protected in worshiping the deity according to the dictates of his own conscience." We today know that reference to every man also includes every woman and every human being. The right to be accountable to God alone for the religious opinions and protected in worshiping the deity according to the dictates of their own conscience, not the dictates of a federal government that says we know better, not the dictates of those who simply say we will interpret that liberty to our satisfaction to accomplish our purposes. As in Washington times, we must defend these rights of conscience and preserve religious liberty for all Americans, regardless of their choice of belief and expression of their faith. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor and suggest the absence